just 2 days after an estimated 200 migrants were feared to have drowned after their boat capsized in the Mediterranean. Some 241 Africans traveling on 2 rubber boats in the same area of the ocean were rescued by the Médecins Sans Frontières vessel Bourbon Argos. Many of the migrants say they felt boarding a migrant boat had been the only option available to stay safe. A Nigerian migrant who wished not to be named said he had lost his family and his home, and that was why he opted to go to Europe.
I left Nigeria because of the crisis of Boko Haram. And everybody knew about Boko Haram in a place. And I lost my family. My house was burned into ashes. So that's the reason that makes me shifted to Libya. From Libya, I decided to ship to Italy.
When we go back to looking at negotiating with terrorists, and what we're asking is negotiating with terrorists ever a good idea? Well, to answer that, we're joined by the Voice of America's Jeffrey Young, who is a security and terrorism expert all the way from Washington. Jeffrey, it's great to see you. Thank you for joining us.
As always, pleasure to be.
Thank you. Now, is negotiating with terrorists ever a good idea?
Well, the short answer sometimes can be yes, if such negotiations produce a release. There are several European countries which very commonly negotiate for the release of their kidnapped nationals, France among them. Obviously, the hostage takers want something in return for that release, a quid pro quo, whether it's money or some other demand. Those negotiations with the terrorists have to decide with meeting the hostage takers' demands, whether that's worthwhile or realistic. I mean, if somebody asks you for $1 billion for the life of a national of a particular country, you have to ask yourself, is that person worth $1 billion? But then there are those, including the United States, who have a stated policy of never negotiating with terrorists or hostage takers so as not to encourage such behavior in the future.
Now, I know that we know about the policies, Jeffrey, but has it ever worked out in any scenario, negotiating, I mean?
Well, yes, it has. The release of the American hostages in 1979, there was a tremendous amount of behind-the-scenes negotiation for that. Also, example from the 1980s, Anglican Church official Terry Waite was very successful in the early to mid-1980s in negotiating with terrorists in the Middle East to secure the freedom of people they were holding. He was successful in Iran in 1980, in Libya in 1984, and in Lebanon in 1985, but then in 1987, the tables were turned. Terry Waite was taken captive by the Islamic Jihad while he was in Lebanon to negotiate with that same group, and they held him until late 1991.
So based on what you're telling me, Jeffrey, I think what you're saying is it's good to negotiate with terrorists when it comes to hostage situations. But what about when it comes to attacks, when we're looking at ceasefire deals here?
All right, fair enough. Well, one has to answer that question by sorting through the options. You can look at Nigeria, for example. Without negotiation with the terrorists in Nigeria, the government is left with conducting a military operation, going after and fighting and possibly and hopefully overcoming these insurgents. Nigeria has exercised the military option before, and yet the insurgents continue to attack. Some could argue that the only way Nigeria, for instance, could stop these insurgent attacks is to find a way and a means of both political and economic inclusion for those who are attacking the government. It may not be palatable to those who stand with a purist point of view, but it may be the most pragmatic option to try to resolve continued violence.
Well, Jeffrey, how do you politically and economically include Boko Haram? Because I'm trying to see the connection. I really don't. I would like if you explain that to me.
Well, I get this, okay? And bringing up Boko Haram is a fair way of raising this question and challenging me on this. What do you do with Boko Haram? What do they ultimately want? We know what they want. They want to establish a purist Islamic state. You would say, well, then how do you negotiate with somebody like that, and how do you include them politically and economically? The answer is very difficult. Once again, you go back to the military option. Is the only way to deal with Boko Haram to exterminate them like cockroaches, to gun them down wherever you find them, wherever you see them? Is that the only way that you do it? I'll turn the question back on you. How would you try to resolve this? Do you see what I mean?
Yes, Jeffrey, but really, what would you say should be the best way to handle this? Because in truth, we've seen incessant attacks almost on a daily basis now. What is the best decision to take at this point to avoid more loss of life like what we're seeing happening in Nigeria?
Military attacks, the so-called kinetic action, only trigger further violence. We've seen this again and again. When the government goes after Boko Haram, they fight back. It's an endless treadmill, an endless continuation of the same violence repeated over and over. I don't have a brilliant answer for this. I don't see why you would want to necessarily include people who have the stated purpose of disincluding you. I get this, I understand this. But again, more efficient military operations may be the only way that you can do it. And I hate to say that that means stepping up the violence in the name of reducing the violence, but maybe that's the only answer, the only option here. You have posed a brilliant and very difficult question, and I grant you that.
Well, Jeffrey Young, thank you very much for that which you could answer, because we obviously don't know everything. Thank you very much, Jeffrey.
Very much I don't. Thank you.
The Voice of America's Jeffrey Young reporting from Washington. He is a terrorism and security expert. Now, at this point, we're going to ask you, here's our question of the day. Do you think it's a good idea for the Nigerian government to negotiate with the Boko Haram sect? Feel free to reach out to us either via email or Twitter. The address and handle are right there on your screen. As always, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for watching Network Africa on Channels Television. I'm Cynthia Are.